I am Bryce Newberger, and this is the Kinship Chronicles, Children of the Phoenix, Chapter 18. Amongst the ruin of the Mages Guild, Cal looked around at the wreckage, and only after a few seconds did he realize the two inmates were now free. The blind one stood almost dazed while the other continued his incessant plea. "Help me!" He started to back up in a terrified crab walk over the rubble. They seemed focused on the black-clad warrior more than Cal, a fact which he was infinitely appreciative of. "Help me!" the one yelled with inappropriate glee. The other sniffed the air like a wolf catching a scent. Dazon did his best to ignore his afflictions. The muscle was torn, but he found he could still function. He had lost his sword somewhere in the fall, and now he was hastily scanning the debris for his weapon. With an aha-inspired moment, he located and retrieved his sword. The blind one seemed to key in on him. Dazon took a defensive stance, setting himself on the balls of his feet. The terror thrust his hands toward Dazon, causing a gust of hot wind to blow at him. He responded by blowing cold air into his palm like it were a funnel. This caused a cold front to rush out from him like a winter wind, forcing the hot air to rise over him. Without missing a beat, he somersaulted sideways as the other terror stomped and caused the ground below Dazon to collapse in a makeshift fault line. Dazon landed in a hard crash. The acrobatics caused incredible pain to his shoulder and thigh. "Magic!" Cal exclaimed in awe. He had never seen magic before. On occasion, he had attempted to spy on the Mages Guild, but his father had forbid him from ever setting foot near it. The mages were a secretive and secluded group. Amazed as he was, he knew he was too close for comfort when the crazy guy that had been chasing him started to produce blue electricity by rubbing his palms together again. Dazon stomped his left foot down onto the rock beneath him. The ground under his right foot responded by popping up in a platform. He extended his leg at the same time to jump off the stony launch pad and set himself 10 feet into the air. He was headed straight for the blind terror with an overhead strike, prepared to cleave him in two when it used wind to blow fire from a nearby building at Dazon. Dazon spun in a twisting motion like a top. This caused the fire to whirl around him, but kept it far enough away to not burn him. Terrors were mages that had broken their minds by seeking to control more magic than they could handle. It was commonly known that they usually controlled two forms of magic. Time seemed to slow for Dazon as his mind worked overtime to consider the situation. The blind ones seemed to control wind, that was certain, but wind was not enough to blow fire as far as he had without another influence. He concluded that this was a fire and wind manipulator. The other one was a bit more obvious. He surely controlled rock and electricity. An odd combination. It was no wonder he went insane. When a mage attempted the dangerous task of expanding his horizons and connects mentally with another form of magic, it was considered best to stick with forms that worked similarly. The mind could barely contain enough mental capacity to psychically connect with one form of magic. Choosing a similar form was like only learning a form and a half, like water and ice, or water and blood. Contrarily, if one chose rock and fire, or darkness and lightning, it was considered insanity. Though it was ultimately a forbidden art altogether, because not a single one who tried retained their sanity. That was until Dazon had discovered the secret to the madness. He landed like a cat despite his leg wound and launched his sword like an arrow as blue electricity arced towards him. The blade conducted the energy like a lightning rod and stuck dead in the center of the chest of the powerful lightning bug. The other terror was growing into a bigger problem. Using wind and flame, he had turned Dazon's defensive twirl into a 4-meter-tall twister of fire. The firestorm would only continue to feed from the flames of the town and grow into something purely elemental that would threaten the entire countryside. Dazon cast his glance around him. Soldiers went about slaughtering civilians, oblivious to his struggle. The town was lost and victory was impossible for these unfortunate victims. He then looked at the boy who was transfixed by the tornado of fire with a naked mix of fear and wonder. Dazon was no hero. At least that's what he believed. But he could not let this boy die here. This town will at least have a legacy, he thought. He remembered the guild had an underground evacuation tunnel. They would use that to escape. He then stomped in similar fashion to the dead terror and caused the ground to open up and swallow Cal. With the boy out of harm's way, he closed his eyes and focused on what he needed to do. He needed to cut off the storm's fuel and strangle it. This required a bit of insanity on his part. He focused on the essence of fire. He consumed his mind with facts and feelings. Fire was 3 parts: oxygen, heat, and fuel. Oxygen was the wind and air. It fed the fire and directed it. Dazon started to sway back and forth like a flickering candle. The fire on the buildings started to match his patterns. He swayed left, and left moved the fire on the rooftops, on the rubble, and on dead bodies. Heat was the next part of fire, which is where things got intense. As long as there was oxygen and fuel, heat would continue to rise. Dazon started to lose himself. He poured thoughts of anger into his psychic link with the flames. He was enraged by the senseless loss of life. He was furious at the Mages Guild that threatened the entire earth with their diabolical schemes. He was maddened by the chaos all around him. He was ablaze at these humans around him causing disorder and strife. There was so much to burn and consume. He would devour it all with his heat and dissolve it all to ash. Dazon was no more. He was the fire itself. The last part of fire was fuel. This was anything that would burn, and all would burn. The wood of all the buildings began to creak and crack like a log in the fire about to combust from too much heat, and then it did. All of the buildings exploded into splinters of fiery death. The firestorm erupted into a scream of fury, then died as quickly as it exploded. The avatar of fire blacked out and then awoke again as Dazon once more. Pressing his hands to his head violently as if holding pieces of his skull together, Dazon stood to overlook the town. The terror was struggling to get up. He crawled next to it and snapped its neck. Regretfully, the town now mirrored the Mages Guild ruins. Behind the buildings nearest him, he spotted a familiar face. It was the blacksmith Bryn, who he had last seen in the interrogation room. His dead body was clutching his wife. It was a sense of romantic tragedy that washed over Dazon and made him think, at least he died with his love. Behind the deceased couple was strewn the corpses of 2 children, one 9 and the other only 3. Dazon wondered who the children were, but that was cut short when another piece of rubble was cast aside and a warrior in silver armor with a tattered red cape sat up. All around, other survivors were collecting themselves. It was time to disappear. Dazon hobbled over to the hole where he cast the boy and descended into the depths of the escape tunnel. "What's going on?" asked Cal. "We're leaving," said the stranger. He walked with staggered step and started heading down the long, ominous walkway. "What about my family?" Cal started trying to climb back up the wall of rock. The stranger halted suddenly, which got Cal's attention. "They're all dead," he said with a harsh dose of matter-of-fact reality. Cal looked back at him with a tearful expression. "Dead? No, you're a liar." "I saw their bodies," again with a flat tone. Cal crumpled and just began to cry hysterically. Dazon hefted the boy over his shoulder and carted him away into the blackness. Behind them, a few minutes after the unlikely pair had left, a figure toppled down the rocky slope, leaving a mess of blood. After a hard thud, the nearly naked man rose to his feet and stumbled after them. He called out one phrase into the darkness. "Help me." Thank you for listening. I'm Bryce Newberger, and this has been the Kinship Chronicles, Children of the Phoenix. If you enjoyed what you heard and you'd like to purchase the full book, then either look up New Books on the Google Play bookstore, NEU Books, or simply click the link in the description. The book is only $5, and I appreciate your support.